As a fractional CFO, I've seen a ton of dev shops get screwed by wrong pricing approaches that keep their profit margins low because their clients were dissatisfied, even though they were actually doing pretty good work. The truth is, the wrong pricing strategy could be the reason your business keeps having those wild waves of feast and famine months and never seems to get out of this nervous, how do we get the next client state. Today, I'm going to show you the 4 ways of how you can price your custom projects, which one to choose to increase your profit margins and to start growing fast without much additional work, and which one to avoid at all cost, which sadly, most dev shops end up choosing. The first one is hourly pricing. Now, this one is a default pricing method that most people end up using because it's really easy to execute. Alongside that, hourly pricing gives you a lot of flexibility when you need to create custom projects, and it's especially ideal for the agile development framework. So in an hourly pricing, you basically calculate your costs and then you drop on a profit margin to your liking. So the margins are always going to stay pretty predictable for any project you make. Now, while this sounds pretty good, hourly pricing is actually one of the hardest pricing structures for a client to accept. It ends up making your prospects a little bit harder to close because they're a lot more price sensitive. Now, the interesting thing is most clients don't actually want a low price in order to close them. Most of them just want a predictable price, even if it ends up being higher. So what I see happening with my clients is that as soon as they move away from the unpredictable pricing models like hourly to something a little bit more predictable, their sales actually start to increase because the clients aren't in constant fear of going over budget. In addition to that, if you price hourly, you're basically forcing a linear growth trajectory for your company. You're never really going to be able to scale your team fast and get out of that feast and famine cycle. Now, if you want to do custom projects, but you want to scale your firm faster, a sprint-based pricing approach might be a lot better. So sprint-based is a hybrid of hourly and fixed fee pricing. And it ends up securing an additional fixed price on every sprint for the project you do for the client on top of an hourly price. So basically a sprint-based pricing is a fixed and determined fee amount for typically a sprint duration, whether that's 2 weeks or 3 weeks, however you like to chunk those up. It fixes the price for that time period. So you could say it's really similar still to the hourly price, but it gets you one step of abstraction away from hourly pricing, which ends up being good from a pricing psychology standpoint. Now, it is a lot better than hourly pricing because it's less tied to your time for the price that you charge, which ultimately makes it a lot easier to scale. So you can finish a project in less time, which helps you make way more profit on that client. And the client ends up being happier too. Now, on the other hand, you'll also have the safety of the hourly price built in. Now, the nice thing about this is it helps you stay flexible when it comes to project scope. So you might still be able to pivot and add additional scope or modify that scope without having to change the statement of work. Now, in order for sprint-based pricing to work well with the Agile framework, you're going to need to talk often about the Agile Golden Triangle with your clients. If they want high quality, fast results, they're going to need to pay more for the sprint. Now, this approach is likely going to frustrate some clients who have fixed budgets or have fixed timelines. And kind of like hourly pricing, it's also very unlikely to qualify for the R&D tax credit. So it might not be the right fit for every circumstance. Now, the best pricing tactic that's going to make your clients happy and it's going to make you happy because you don't have to work a bunch of weekends and stress out about where the next client's going to be is value-based pricing. Admittedly, though, a lot of agencies try to aim for value-based pricing, but they end up falling way short and end up doing cost-plus pricing, which destroys their margins. Now, cost-plus pricing is basically a fixed fee agreement based on your estimated cost to complete the scope of work multiplied by a target markup. So just to give you an example, it might look something like this. Let's say you have an app that you estimate is going to take about 3 months to build. So your typical software developer is going to be about $100 an hour, and you're thinking you're probably going to need about 2 software developers for that 3-month period of time. Roughly, they're going to be working about 140 hours per month. So $100 an hour times 140 hours times 2 developers times 3 months, you get about $84,000. That's going to be the bulk of your cost. Then you also have the designer that's probably at about $120 an hour bill rate, and they're probably going to need to be engaged, call it 80 hours total for the project. It's about $9,600 right there. And then you've got your architect. Let's say that person's at about $135 an hour because they're also going to be doing some essentially project managing, very, very high level. And that's going to be maybe 30 hours worth of work. And that's roughly $4,000. So if you add all of those numbers up, you get to about a cost of somewhere in the ballpark of $97,000 or $98,000. Now, typically speaking, when you're targeting a gross margin in this industry, you want to say at the very least you're getting about a 50% gross margin. So in order to get 50% gross margin, you're going to take whatever your cost is and multiply it by 2. So if we're thinking it's going to cost us about $97,000, $98,000, multiply it by 2, you're basically at about $200,000 for a price for the project, right? So $200,000 minus $98,000 is going to get you $102,000. That's a pretty okay gross margin. So for that example, you're sitting just above 50% gross margin, which isn't too bad. You go to pitch that to the client. You say, this project's going to take about 3 months to develop, and that's going to roughly cost you $200,000. And you fix your bid at $200,000. Now, it's a win for the client in the sense that they know exactly how much this thing is going to cost. They can either bring that back to management, or if they themselves are management, they might be talking with investors. And so they're going to be able to know if this is worth the investment because they'll have projections on how much value they're going to be able to get from this $200,000 software project. So it's a win on their side. For you, it could be a win, but it really requires your estimates to be absolutely spot on. So this approach is good on paper because if you do hit those project timelines and goals, you're going to have pretty decent gross margins. It's also going to help you be a lot more likely to qualify for the R&D tax credit. So the problem is usually projects tend to lengthen in time and the scope ends up being a lot bigger than you originally anticipate when you go to scope out the project. So what usually happens is instead of massive profits and growth, you have margins that are destroyed, clients who are unhappy, and you have to scramble to finally finish that project at 2 o'clock in the morning when you could have just been spending time with your family just to get rid of this nightmare of a project. The worst part of this, all of your success is still attached to the time spent on that project. If you spend too much time, your margins are going to disappear and you're left with nothing. So how do you avoid the cost plus pricing trap and implement the value-based pricing tactic that can scale your firm in just a few months? Value-based pricing is the most complex pricing tactic out of all, but if you can figure it out, it is a game changer. In value-based pricing, you still offer a fixed fee to the client like you would with cost plus, but the only difference is that you focus entirely on the value proposition for your client. What this means in practice is that you price based on how much money or time your client is going to save or make because of the product you're delivering to them. So if your project makes them anywhere from 5 to 10 times the amount they're paying for it, they're usually pretty happy to do it. And you end up making a ton more money. In order to do value-based price, you'll have to focus narrowly on your ICP or ideal client persona to be able to build processes and people around the problems that repeatedly arise in that industry or niche. That way, you'll be able to spend less time delivering on every project, and you'll be able to produce more value each time you onboard a client. The problem with value-based pricing is that it requires a niche specialization. When you try to implement the strategy across unrelated industries, your margins are probably going to suffer. Very simply, the reason for that is because value-based pricing works best when you have a clear and defined value proposition. When you start moving around to a bunch of different industries, you don't have clarity on exactly what the pain points are, and you have a harder time speaking to them when you go to pitch the project. By the way, if you're a DevShop founder and you need help narrowing down your ideal client persona or implementing these strategies to scale your business without bankrupting yourself in the process, click the link down in the description and I can help you out. There's one problem with all these strategies though. Let me know if this sounds relatable to you. You end up getting a great upfront deposit from your client, and it seems like you're making a ton of money because you haven't even started the work yet. And then as the time progresses, you know, well, I had a lot of that money from the deposit, and I know I am still doing a lot of work right now, but you're really not sure on a month-on-month basis whether or not you're actually profitable on that client. The only way you're ever going to know it is once you get to the very end of the project, well beyond the time where you can course correct during the project, and you end up finding out months later that you actually lost money on that project with that client. Now, even if you get the pricing strategy right, the wrong accounting strategy could still eat up your margins regardless. So watch this next video. where I show you the difference between cash and accrual accounting and which one you should use to avoid losing margins unnecessarily and grow your firm without bankrupting yourself in the process. See you in the next video.